Welcome to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about the life and times of Wes Montgomery. John Leslie, or Wesley Montgomery as he was known, was one of the profound forces in the development of jazz guitar of his time. He had a distinctive playing style, a swinging style of play that was characterized by his frequent use of octaves. He emerged on the jazz scene relatively late in his career. He started out recording professionally in his late 30s. He went on to carve a niche for himself in the hard bop and soul jazz genre. In later years, he transitioned to a more fusion-oriented style of jazz. So he was born in Indianapolis in 1923. He was originally inspired by guitarist Charlie Christian, upon which he started taking guitar lessons himself. He later became famous for his unique style of guitar playing. He just used the side of his thumb to pluck the strings. He also became famous using octaves very frequently during his solo performances. From 1948 to 50, he was a member of the Lionel Hampton Orchestra. He started out playing with the Pacific label, then went on to record with Riverside Records in the late 50s, with whom he released a series of bebop tracks. In 1964, he transitioned to Verve Records and released 10 albums alongside organist Jimmy Smith. In 1965, he released his most famous album of all time, Smokin' at the Half Note. 1 year later, he was awarded a Grammy for Best Instrumental Jazz Performance. He died in 1968, leaving behind a legacy as one of the greatest innovators and improvisers in jazz. So that was a quick insight into Wes Montgomery's life and times and best hits, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. Coming up on the show, we're going to be talking in depth about his biography, also some of his best albums of all time. We'll be right back after some music. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's show, it's about Wes Montgomery, his biography and best hits. And on this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. So it was the mid-20th century. People like Charlie Christian and Django Reinhardt had established a prevailing standard for jazz guitar playing in those times. And Charlie Christian was one musician that influenced Montgomery the most. But Wes Montgomery had his own unique style of interpreting jazz guitar playing. His playing incorporated melody, harmony, and technique. He would take traditional harmonies and reharmonize them in his solo playing. This technique has ever since been an inspiration to jazz guitarists who came after him. When it came to chord playing, he'd deviate from the chord playing of the rhythm section of his band, causing a whole new sound to emerge. A sound that was unique, distinct, and became associated with him in later years. He'd also play in exclusively high octaves during his solo performances. Wes Montgomery was largely self-taught. He developed certain characteristics that he became famous for in later years, like his habit of playing the guitar with one side of his thumb instead of a guitar pick. That caused his guitar melodies to develop a warm, swinging sound that set him apart from his contemporaries of the day. He emerged in the mid-50s in the hard bop genre of jazz. Here's some of his iconic albums from that time. 1960s, The Incredible Jazz Guitar of Wes Montgomery, 1960s Full House, and 1965's Smokin' at the Half Note. In later years, he produced jazz albums that were more fusion-oriented, like California Dreaming, Going Out of My Head, and Road Song, that inspired many other artists after him. So, Wes Montgomery was born on March 6, 1925 in Indiana. He started out playing the guitar. He was self-taught after listening to Charlie Christian music. He started out playing alongside his brothers in local clubs before starting out touring the Midwest. In 1948, he joined Lionel Hampton's orchestra, where he played alongside other jazz greats like Charles Mingus on bass. He returned to his hometown 2 years later, where he took up performing solo in clubs again. 1955, he and a group of friends began their own quintet, starring alongside Sonny Johnson and his brother Alonzo Johnson in the Montgomery Johnson Quintet. In the years to come, the quintet recorded some classic tracks on the Pacific label. Then in 1959, Wes was discovered by Cannonball Adderley, who introduced him to Riverside Records. His debut album on Riverside Records was called A Dynamic New Sound. In the early 60s, he made another hit album, The Incredible Jazz Guitar of Wes Montgomery, that put him in the limelight nationally and internationally. This album features himself on guitar, pianist Tommy Flanagan, bassist Percy Hart, and drummer Albert Hart. He went on recording for Riverside Records throughout the early 60s. He was now at his peak. Then he went on to sign up with Verve Records and A&M Records in the years to come. One of his albums released at the time, Going Out of My Head in 1967, won him an award for Best Instrumental Jazz Performance. Wes Montgomery died unexpectedly of a heart attack at the age of 43 in 1968. He left behind a legacy as one of the leading jazz guitarists of his time. So that was a quick insight into Wes Montgomery's biography, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, we're talking about the life and times and best hits of jazz icon Wes Montgomery. And now it's time for some promo news. the jazz ensemble Strictly Smokin' Big Band are out with their latest album release. It's going up for grabs on the 17th of May. The name of the album is Strictly Smoking and Friends, and it's got an all-star cast of British jazz musicians: Bruce Adams, Alan Barnes, Paul Booth, Polly Gibbons, Gareth Loughrane, Mike Lovett, Mark Nightingale, Ross Stanley and Anthony Strong. This is one of the leading bands from Northeast England. They were founded in 2003 by Michael Lamb. Their music is cutting edge and also innovative. Their albums are full of creative improvisation. So this album features a bunch of jazz classics and one original composition. The song Cool Strutting gives us a glimpse into epic bass melodies and organ music. Flute music is the highlight of Daisy May, a George Duke classic. Air Gin, a Sonny Rollins hit, is performed on this album with some beautiful tenor saxophone music. Other hit tracks in this album include Pete Kelly's Blues, Sweet and Lovey, and Devil May Care. Twitterbird Grooves is an original by the band saxophonist Paul Booth. It's a confident, groovy sort of track. So the album is going up for grabs on May 17th. For more information, please visit www.thefirestation.org.uk. And that was some trending album news right there on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. Be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Wes Montgomery's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. And this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's show, it's about Wes Montgomery, his life and times and best hits. And on this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first album is called Fingerpickin'. Now, Fingerpickin' is an album from the music compilation of The Master Sounds, one of Montgomery's early bands with his brothers. One of the highlights of the album is Montgomery's guitar solos, which gives us a glimpse into his guitar style even back then. Also, the guest appearance of trumpeter Freddie Hubbard on some other tracks. The Wes Montgomery Trio, A Dynamic New Sound, is another album. This one's one of Montgomery's best albums and was taken during his early years at Riverside Records. Critics said of his guitar playing on this album that it was a revolution in technique and execution. The Incredible Jazz Guitar of Wes Montgomery is another great album from Montgomery's compilation. This album sees him paired up against a beautiful rhythm section, contains a compilation of classics and original compositions. Cannonball Adderley and the Pole Winners is an album produced in 1960 by Riverside Records. They wanted to make an album collaboration between artists who had topped poles like the Downbeat Pole or the Metronome Readers Pole. So this album brings together pole winners: Cannonball Adderley, Wes Montgomery, Victor Feldman, Ray Brown and Louis Hayes. The result is an all-star collaboration album. So on this hour, we're going to be talking in depth about these albums. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, we're talking about the life and times and best hits of jazz icon Wes Montgomery. And on this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first album is called Fingerpickin'. Now, Fingerpickin' is an album from the music compilation of The Master Sounds, one of Montgomery's early bands with his brothers. He would bounce a schedule between factory jobs during the day and playing local gigs at night. Around that time, he formed an ensemble with his brothers, Buddy and Monk. They were also musicians. Monk was a bassist. Buddy played vibraphone and piano. Together, they started out performing in local clubs, calling themselves The Master Sounds. Fingerpickin' is an album from the music compilation of The Master Sounds. There's two sessions in this album, one from 1957, another from 1958. Some of the tracks also include the trumpet playing of Freddie Hubbard as guest star. Other tracks in this album are Montgomery's solos on guitar. Another album called the Wes Montgomery Trio, A Dynamic New Sound. So, story goes that one day while Montgomery was performing at one of his local gigs early in his career, he was spotted by Cannonball Adderley, who was in the audience. Cannonball Adderley was so impressed with Wes's guitar playing that he signed him up to Riverside Records, where Montgomery found himself playing alongside other jazz greats like Bill Evans and Thelonious Monk. So he started out in Riverside playing alongside organist Melvin Ryan and Paul Parker on drums. They would go on to collaborate over a number of performances over the years. So this album, the Wes Montgomery Trio, A Dynamic New Sound, was recorded in like form in 1959. It's got some exciting rhythm section music, showcases Montgomery's beautiful guitar playing for the first time, especially in his solo performances. One of his originals makes an appearance here, the song Jingles. Also, his guitar playing on the song Satin Doll was considered a novelty at the time. Critics said of his guitar playing on this album, it was a revolution in technique and execution. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a 36-year-old reimagines the jazz guitar solo. Another album, The Incredible Jazz Guitar of Wes Montgomery. So in 1960, Montgomery released what many people say was his best album of all time. On this album, we see Wes Montgomery paired up alongside a stellar rhythm section. There was Tommy Flanagan on piano. He had already seen performances alongside Sonny Rollins and John Coltrane. Percy Hart's on bass. He had also played alongside Miles Davis in the Modern Jazz Quintet. His brother, Albert Hart, on drums, had also performed alongside John Coltrane and others. So this album showcases some of Wes Montgomery's original compositions, songs like The Natural Blues, 4 on 6 and West Coast Blues. The song Air Gin, originally written by Sonny Rollins, is a complicated rendition as Wes Montgomery navigates his way through the melody in his unique guitar playing of the song. The album went on to be included in the National Recordings Registry by the Library of Congress. And an album called Cannonball Adderley and the Pole Winners. This one was recorded in 1960 when Montgomery was at his peak. He'd already won the Metronome Readers' Ball for Most Promising Instrumentalist in Billboard and the Downbeat magazine's Talent Deserving Wider Recognition Award. So that year, Riverside Records decided to make an album collaboration between pole winners. And this album brings together other pole winners like Cannonball Adderley, he was the band leader and also on alto saxophone, Montgomery's on guitar, Victor Feldman's on vibraphone and piano, Ray Brown's on bass and Louis Hayes on drums. So that was a compilation of some of Wes Montgomery's best albums of all time, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, it's about the life and times and best hits of jazz icon Wes Montgomery, and now it's time to talk about more promo news. Trending right now, a jazz festival in Houston, Texas. Some of the names from the lineup: Jasmine Gent, Greg Manning, and more. So I'm talking about the second annual Empire State Jazz Festival. It's taking place at the Discovery Green in downtown Houston. It's going to be a massive event featuring some epic names from the jazz arena. It's taking place Saturday, May 11th. The festival commences at noon and goes on until 10 p.m. Gates opening to attendees at 11 a.m. And it's going to be a massive event celebrating jazz music in all its forms, highlighted by some of the leading names from the jazz world. Grammy-nominated artists, Billboard chart toppers. Here's some of the names from the lineup that's just been announced: Stephen Richard, Greg Manning, Blake Aaron, the Pat Williams Group, Jasmine Gent, and more. So this event is curated by former NFL player Victor Alotti, and it's all about celebrating jazz and its artists. Part of the funds raised by the events go to the Victors Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing musical instruments to underprivileged youth. So here's some ticket information. General admission tickets cost $45 per person. VIP tickets cost $150 per person. Additionally, VIP 4-pack ticket packages are on offer for group bookings. For more information, please visit EmpireStateJazzFest.com. So that was some trending festival news right there, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Wes Montgomery's best albums of all time. Stay tuned.